Hi guys, Ali Maxwell here. The following clip is a section taken from Zonal Marking, which is the podcast that I host alongside the Athletics tactics guru, Michael Cox. And you can listen to the rest of that weekly show for free wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, ad-free when you subscribe to The Athletic. Hope you enjoy it.
Well, it's quite interesting looking at the league tables from across Europe at the moment because there's some surprise names up there in the top 4 or 5 positions in a few leagues. So we're going to be doing a quick whistle-stop tour of 5 teams who are doing really well, who have overachieved at the start of this season. And I guess basically discussing whether it's a flash in the pan or whether we think they can sustain a challenge for the Champions League places or maybe even the title.
Spot on. We are taking a look at 5 of Europe's overachievers. And when I was making my notes earlier, it struck me that these days the word overachiever in some contexts has developed almost a negative connotation. But we are very much using the dictionary definition. We're not trying to have a subtle dig at these teams. That is someone who does more than they are expected to do and who is more successful than others. We're going to look at some of Europe's early overachievers. And Tom Warville, it's worth pointing out that there's often quite a tedious back and forth over the phrase, the table does or doesn't lie, the league table, that is, in football. I suppose on one part, it can't lie, does it? It certainly reflects the results of the completed matches at any stage of the season. But I think what we would mean by that, right, is that it also masks quite a lot of contextual and juicy nuggets, which can maybe help us be predictive and work out what might happen from here. Does that tally with how you think about that discussion?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much bang on. Like you said, the table never lies. It does tell you what's happened in games, tells you results, goal scored, goal difference, etc., etc. But yeah, it kind of does mask or doesn't help bring to the forefront whether the teams and their position in the table are actually kind of deserved. And I think that for that reason, that's why we use all these fancy underlying numbers to try and get a grasp of, is what the table is telling us the truth, or should we expect things to change in the coming weeks?
To that end, let's talk about our first team. That is Southampton in the Premier League. Now, thanks to Saints' Friday night win against Newcastle United, they hit the top of the Premier League for the very first time in 32 years. Sadly, the rest of the league then played their matches from that weekend, which does tend to happen. And now, as we record, Saints are 4th in the table. But what a marvellous sort of half a day that was. And what an excellent start to the season it's been. A very interesting team to chat about that I don't think we have zoomed in on this podcast yet. Michael, we can't do a deep dive on these teams today. What we want to do is give an overview, I suppose, a couple of interesting bits of detail that you and Tom have spotted, and then the listeners can go away and delve a little deeper. When it comes to Southampton, they are in 4th after 8 games. It's a great start to the season. What are they doing so well? I
think more than anything else, they just play as if they really, really know what they're doing on the pitch. And I know that's a general thing to say, but they use quite an unusual system. It's 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2, depending on how you want to look at it, with the 2 wide players coming inside. And their passing combination is just really good, very purposeful. I like the way that they use the central midfielders, Ward-Prowse and Romeu, who basically stay in position. There's good rotation out wide. Armstrong and Redmond, usually the wide players coming in field. The fullbacks overlap very well and time their runs. Ings and Adams, as we know, have a very good relationship up front. Ings was out for the weekend win or the Friday night win against Newcastle, but they coped with that with Walcott playing up front, who I thought did quite well. And they just look like a really cohesive side. And the thing I like about Southampton's run of success is, it's not dependent upon a couple of summer signings. It's not like they sat their manager and they've started playing a different way. They've believed in the process. And it's a process that has been in place for, well over a season now. And it's included a period where Southampton were not getting results. But I think when you watch them, you really sense that something good was in the pipeline, and that's come to fruition. And I think they deserve a lot of credit as a club. Obviously, Hasenhüttl has done a very good job with a number of players, I think, who have improved since he's been there. And they just play good football. So it's just nice to see them up there at the top of the league.
Tom, what do the early season numbers say about this Southampton team? What they do well, perhaps what they aren't doing quite as well, and how you might think this sort of form will continue or otherwise over the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I really liked your definition of the start of what an overachiever is, and if I could tweak it slightly, if I may, I think we can say an overachiever in this context is someone who has scored more than they have expected to do so, definitely compared to other teams in their league. Southampton are definitely a side who are overachieving in terms of expected goals at the moment, and in such a small number of games. I mean, we've only seen 8 games so far this season. They are kind of overperforming at one end and underperforming at the other. So they've scored 15 goals so far from 8.1 non-penalty expected goals, which that's a huge return, and definitely backed by the likes of James Ward-Prowse's free kicks. Danny Ings has scored a few goals as well, which you'd think that won't be kind of from repeatable situations later in the season. But then at the back, they've conceded 12, whereas their expected goals is closer to 9. It's currently 8.5. So they have conceded a few more than again the numbers suggest they should have. So I think that overall this is a team which are slightly higher on the table than perhaps they should be. But in a season in which there's going to be a lot of games, a lot of injuries in a short period of time, I think Southampton's way of playing is very much going to depend on kind of whether they can keep their own players fit, but could be really, really damaging to the opposition who just are going to get run into the ground by them.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? One of their key strengths is their pressing, which comes obviously from Ralph Hasenhüttl. It's not something new, but it's something that's working very well for them. But you've kind of raised the point there that potentially with the busier schedule than general seasons, that could but be an issue for them just in terms of physicality, in terms of being able to keep that up over the course of a season. But Michael, in terms of that pressing philosophy, I know that you've been enjoying Hasenhüttl's press and hustle.
Yeah, definitely. I think their performance against Newcastle in that Friday night game was just incredible for that. I can't remember the last time I saw a game where, it was just decided by one side pressing so well. I mean, they created 4 really good chances from winning the ball high up, including for the 2 goals. First of all, Almiron was robbed by Walcott and Walker-Peters, and Walcott crossed for Che Adams to volley home. The second one, Longstaff, or one of the Longstaffs, can't remember which one, robbed on the edge of the area by Armstrong, who fired in. And there was another couple of really good chances. And, watching that game, I was almost getting annoyed at Newcastle for being so dopey in possession, but obviously you have to give Southampton great credit for that. And it's interesting as well, like what Tom says about the nature of this season, because obviously Southampton do depend on pressing, and that can be tiring, but they don't have European distractions compared to the top clubs. They're out of the League Cup already. They've got a pretty young squad. So I think they're just more likely to be able to sustain their press throughout the course of the season than a side like Manchester City or Liverpool, who already with kind of back-to-back Champions League games, look pretty tired at the weekend. I certainly haven't seen that kind of tiredness from Southampton so far.
It does look like they've got a pretty tough stretch of games coming up. Tom, we're not really in the industry on this pod of opinions for opinion's sake and looking for clicks and big headlines. But I am going to just put a little bit of pressure on you both with each of these teams and ask you, we're about a quarter of the way through the season. It's a good time to ask, based on these overachievers, is it a flash in the pan or is this robust? I'm not suggesting that you tell me Southampton will finish in the top 4 this season, but would you lean towards them challenging for 7th or 8th spot, or do you see them dropping back down towards where they finished up last season?
I guess I can go first. I do think that, Southampton's numbers don't look good enough at the moment for a top 4 finish, definitely. I think they're probably more in the kind of 6 to 8 range, and it very much depends down the stretch just whether they can keep this energy and keep the pressure up, really. I do think that we've seen a bit of fortune for them so far this season with, only really the main injury impact has been come to Danny Ings with his knee injury. Although Che Adams has actually had a really good season this year. He's got more expected goals than Ings so far and is getting into really good scoring chances. And we saw from the Newcastle game, he can finish as well at times. For me, I definitely think that they're probably more in the 6 to 8 range than the 1 to 6 range.
Agree with that, Michael?
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I was going to be a bit bolder and say, they'll qualify for the Europa League, which would probably be 7th place. Yeah, I think they're a good side. I think that they just, like I say, they have a really clear intention of how they want to play, which I don't think is the case for all the top sides. And another thing I really like about them, which is completely irrelevant and not the kind of numbers that Tom Warville deals in, but their shirt numbers are fantastic. So when they've got their first choice 11 out, 9 of them wear 1 to 11 shirt numbers. The 2 exceptions are Jan Bednarek, who should be wearing 5 to complete the kind of 1 to 11, but can't have that because Jack Stevens wears it. So he's wearing 35. And the other one is Stuart Armstrong, who doesn't wear 7 because Shane Long still has 7. So he wears 17. So even the two exceptions still have the number that they should be wearing contained within their actual shirt number. And I think they deserve great credit for that.
Very close to Cox's wet dream, that. Let's move on to our second overachiever. That is Sassuolo in Serie A. And I'm really excited to hear about these guys because it's an amazing story in general and in recent history, specifically Sassuolo's rise from the regional leagues to Serie A, where they are well established now in their 8th season. Their highest finish, 6th in 2015-16. They finished 8th last season. I think there are some parallels with them and Hoffenheim, for example, if there are listeners who know their German football history, but less so about their Italian football history. But this season, as we record, we find them in second place on 15 points from 7 Serie A games, unbeaten as well. Michael, when we talk about Sassuolo, I think we have to talk about the manager, Roberto De Zerbi. My notes here, detailed as ever, just say cool tactics, which I'm hoping you're going to tell me more about.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. I mean, they just play really fun football. De Zerbi is, I'd say, from the new generation of Italian managers, which I would say means basically he likes attacking football. He wants to outscore the opposition. He doesn't mind games where they might ship 3 or 4 occasionally because he thinks that's, a risk and reward thing. He wants to attack. I think there's some similarities with Maurizio Sarri and the way that he played at Napoli. By that, I mean, I think they counter-attack with possession, if that makes sense. Their build-up play in defensive positions is quite slow because they want to tempt the opposition forward. But when they can do that, they're really good at then just transferring the ball through the press really, really quickly, which is what Sarri did brilliantly at times at Napoli. Yeah, they're just an exciting side to watch. I think they can overload the wide areas effectively. They use the fullbacks well with late runs. The midfielders sometimes do a bit of an Ajax thing where they drift out wide and help play combinations down the flanks. And they're just really exciting to watch. I mean, yeah, they're up there with Atalanta, I would say, as probably the 2 most exciting sides in Serie A at the moment.
Wow, sold. I mean, James Horncastle wrote a great piece on De Zerbi last season, and specifically about what you've spoken about there, the passing through the press and how much Pep Guardiola admires that and has noticed that and watches Sassuolo games when he is studying other sides. Tom, if you look at the numbers, the underlying data, what does it look like Sassuolo are doing so well that they've started the season unbeaten and currently second in the table?
I think that, like Michael said, they are a team that thrives a lot with the possession that they have, and they've actually turned that into some pretty good chances so far this season. They're kind of the 5th highest team for expected goals so far, and they've scored 18, which is table topping and joint with Atalanta, but that is obviously with a fair slice of luck, given that they've actually only got 13.1 xG. But I do think overall, like, this is a team that has really improved from last season. I mean, they top the table in Serie A also for the share of possession that they have. So yeah, like Michael said, they very much kind of try and draw the opposition out and try and dominate games. And I think there's also some parallels to perhaps how kind of Leicester play and also how they kind of look as a team. I mean, as you've got Caputo up front, who is very much the Jamie Vardy mould of an older striker who is the team's focal attacking point. I think then you've got mainly a quite a younger squad, really, or at least it's not a squad that's packed with older players, as can be the case in Syria. But it's not all kind of rainbows and lollipops, I'm afraid, because in their game against Udinese at the weekend, the game finished and it was had a combined 6 shots in total and 0.2 xG for both sides. So although Sassuolo do have the kind of fundamentals to be a fun attacking team, a fun team to watch, sometimes that can end in quite a dour affair.
I'll give them that one. This is the joint top scoring team in the league with Atalanta. They've scored 4 on 3 separate occasions this season and 3 as well against Torino in a 3-3 draw. Coxie, they must have some quite exciting players like Atalanta. Who stands out for you in this Sassuolo team?
Yeah, probably still Berardi, who plays on the right flank and always cuts inside onto his left foot, a kind of Iron Robin style wide forward. As Tom mentions, I just love Capuzzo. I think he's a classic Italian number 9. I think they still call them bombers, don't they, in Italy? I'm not sure whether that pronunciation is right, but just your kind of classic target man who stays in the middle and basically waits for crosses. I mean, you do seem to get quite a lot of these players in Serie A who just thrive really late on in their kind of mid-30s almost. And I think the combination between those two players, or the contrast between those two players, a really quick, exciting winger and a classic penalty box striker works really well. I mean, this maybe isn't something that, Tom would look at and thinks, it looks sustainable, but they've also scored some fantastic goals, a lot of long-range goals. I mean, Berardi has smacked in a couple from outside the box. Midfielder Burabia scored a great free kick a few weeks ago, and my favourite would be Vlad Kirikez, who people may remember from Tottenham Hotspur in the Villas Boas era, I think, scored an absolutely incredible goal against Torino. I mean, as good a goal as you'll see in open play from centre-back. Just strode forward and thumped it into the top corner. So yeah, they are exciting. They score good goals. Their build-up play is good, and there's moments of individual magic. And I don't know whether you're going to ask me for a prediction on this one, but I think I'd say the seventh. I'd say the same. I'd say seventh, because I think, you look at last season, they finished 8th. But peculiarly, they were 11 points off 7th place. So they were never really going to finish in the top 7. But I think they'll be in the mix this year. I think they'll probably fall away a little bit. But I think they'll be challenging the more traditional sides at the top of the table.
I think 7th is a good shout. I do wonder if that gap between kind of Sassuolo and the rest is going to maintain this season, though. We saw increase in goal scoring in the Premier League is up, and it's definitely the case in Serie A as well. If you look at, I looked at the expected goals figures so far for all of the teams in Serie A and compared them across the last 3 or 4 seasons. And the kind of the best team up until this season we've seen is Atalanta last year in 1920. And so far this season, we've had 4 teams better than Atalanta per game and 3 just behind them as well. So we've the likes of Roma, Milan, Inter, Atalanta, Sassuolo and Juve this season are all kind of firing on all cylinders. So if you're looking for attacking football, that's definitely your league. And one stat which I particularly liked that I found was that under Gennaro Gattuso this season, Napoli are averaging 19 shots per game, which is the most in Europe, and absolutely not what I would expect from a Gattuso team.
There you go. The only thing I would add before we move on, they have had a pretty generous schedule, Sassuolo, so far. They've played Napoli. That's the only side they've taken on currently in the top half of the division. And I think there's one thing we can say with some certainty about Serie A is that the teams at the bottom do tend to be fairly poor. So bigger tests to come for Sassuolo, but certainly a team that I'll be keeping a much closer eye on after that.